Hey, I'm going to answer a question about debt, leasing, and being stuck, needing more equipment, not having the money. I'm going to read you the question and then I'll answer it. It's a long question, so I've got to read it to you. Hey, I have a question on leasing equipment. Not sure if it's right for me or not. With my lawn care business, I run 3 mowing crews. April through November here in Iowa, I have always ran Skags, but I can already see myself digging a hole the bigger I get. Not uncommon. I currently have 7 Skags averaging 10,000 a piece new. You know how it works. After 2 years, the hours build up, the breakdowns start in, and after 3 years, I'm left with a used mower worth about $2,000 on a good day. Honestly, I can't afford to buy Skags outright, so I finance them through Sheffield Financial, 4 years, 0% interest. They don't last me 4 years, so here I am going into 2017 with $35,000 in debt, mower debt, and I'm needing to replace roughly half my 7 Skags. To top it off, I'm looking at adding a 4th mowing crew this spring because we can barely keep up with all the mowing we had last season. I desperately need advice on how to best manage my equipment financially. Leasing mowers for 2 years is my current thinking, hoping it will wipe out the $35,000 in debt with my trade-ins. All right, so I'm going to answer this the best I can. I'm not an expert at leasing. I'm not even an expert at managing debt. So I'm going to kind of throw some stuff at you. I don't have notes, so it's in a little bit of an unorganized way, but hopefully you'll glean from this some ideas. My first thought here is that whether you finance the equipment for 4 years or you lease it for 2, the guys that are leasing you the equipment are not dumb. They understand the useful life of a piece of equipment. So granted, it's only lasting you 2 years, or you didn't specifically say that, but you're wearing out your equipment prior to 4 years. My hunch is that whatever the lease payment is, as compared to the 0% interest finance payment spread over 4 years, your lease payment on 2 years, based on the amount of consumption on that piece of equipment, that use, is not going to be drastically cheaper than your payments over 4 years. Could be wrong, but if they are drastically cheaper, what are the limitations that have been put up on you about hours and things of that sort? If you run the numbers, is it really that much cheaper to have the piece of equipment on a 2-year lease than a 4-year 0% interest note? That's the first thing that came to mind. Again, these guys you're dealing with are not dumb. They're not going to just charge you less money and get back a piece of equipment that they can't sell and still at the end of the day fully cover the cost of the equipment originally plus earning profit and interest and such on that. So I just question if that will really be the solution. I'm not bothered by the idea that you're financing the equipment for 4 years at 0% interest. I don't love debt, but the reality is a lot of guys get themselves in trouble because they try not to have any debt whatsoever. Whenever you get into the game of debt, or you get into the game of allowing your clients to pay you on terms like 30-day terms, whenever you get you're seasonal and you are under contract and you're bringing a lot of money in early in the year, or let me say you're on per cut, so you're bringing money in now and you won't get paid in the winter. Whenever you complicate your business, whenever you get into project-based work and you're doing big projects and you have lots of parts and materials and you've got down payments and phased billing and all that, you have drastically complicated your business. So you have to be more on top of your financials. You have to understand what's really going on in your financials, because you cannot just look at your bank account and understand what's going on. You can't just look at a P&L. You can't just look at a balance sheet. They don't tell you nearly enough. When your business gets complicated, like I described, which is the way it works for most in the lawn and landscape industry, you have to start thinking about cash flow projection. You have to understand the ins and outs of money, the flow in and flow out of money in terms of receivables and payables, to understand what your real cash position is, how much money you really have, what your cash position will be in 30 days, 60 days. It's a little bit complicated. It's intimidating. It's not super complicated, but it's something that most owners ignore. They don't think about. The business gets complicated and they go through their business hoping and praying that everything will work out and there'll be enough money, and it's a horrible strategy. And so my point in going that direction is I'm not opposed to debt, but be aware of what you're doing when you're using debt. You have to be even more aware of what's really going on in the business, which is a little bit of what you're talking about here. You're in the situation now where you've got, as you stated, roughly 3.5 pieces of equipment that are near useless, yet you're still paying on them. You need to replace them plus add more equipment. So I also think that there's something bigger going on inside your company. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I have a hunch that there's a bigger problem inside your company. The problem is either it's probably going to be pricing, meaning you're not charging enough. The problem might be around inefficiency. You're paying out a lot of labor, but that labor is incurring a huge amount of non-billable expense, meaning that you've got a guy that you're paying 40 hours a week, but you're only billing him out at 28 hours a week. There's something wrong that's putting you in this situation. There's probably some other factor. There's probably another story. If you and I sat down and we looked at the financials and we talked about the business, there's something together we'd uncover. Or there's a hunch you already have, a feeling you already have about what's really at the core of this issue. And my hunch is it's going to go back to pricing. It's going to go back to some level of inefficiency. There's something going on. And so I think there's the root here is we need to figure out if we are absolutely pricing all of our work correctly. Because if we are, and we're understanding all of the real costs that go into producing that work, then you should be okay in this model. Unless there's a lot of other debt from some previous business acquisitions or some prior mistakes or some marketing that went bad. Unless there's a lot of other debt that you're servicing that has contributed to having to take on this debt, I think there's a bigger root issue going on. So I haven't directly answered your question. Should you lease? Should you buy? My hunch is that at 4%, 0% interest, you're better off buying. That's my hunch. However, if on 4 years, 0% interest, if you were buying under a lease and they were getting all their money in advance, could you negotiate the deal down? So hypothetically, if you're paying $10,000 per SCAG and you're buying 4, that's $40,000 at 0% interest. But if you were to say, I'm going to lease this equipment, what kind of deal can we negotiate if you could get that equipment at $8,000 a SCAG, so $32,000 instead of $8 or $40,000, and finance that? Okay, now that's a different conversation. So I'm wondering, would you have the ability to do quite a bit of negotiating if you went in and wrote a check for this equipment versus the 0% financing? Again, we're dealing with very savvy individuals. When you hear 0% interest, that doesn't mean money costs nothing. It means they're eating that interest in some way. They're self-financing it. That's a cost to them. And so they're making up the financing cost in the price of the equipment. So could you, under the scenario of paying off that equipment by writing a check, which you can create that by getting the leasing company to give you the money to pay off the retailer that you're buying from, could you negotiate this down, $1,000 a piece of equipment, $2,000 a piece of equipment? That math needs to go into deciding if leasing or buying is better. I can't answer it without all those details, but I can give you some things to think about, and that's what I've done. So you're going to have to run the numbers between the two. You have to absolutely know on the lease what is the leasing company idea of use, the life of the equipment. What's their idea of how many hours you can put on the equipment? What are those restrictions, and are you going to violate those? Because violating the lease covenants, or whatever the language for that would be, can get really expensive. Like if you lease a car, and your car, you can only drive it 12,000 miles a year, and then you drive it 20,000 miles a year, that becomes very expensive, and it generally was a very bad idea to lease it. You should have bought it. Same kind of thing can happen to you on this equipment. So number one, figure out what you could really buy it for if you lease the equipment, and then run the numbers and figure out which one has the best, the least expense to you. And then number two, let's think about what else might be going on in the business that's putting you in this situation, because I fear that you're just going to keep digging a hole. You don't need to be scared or panicked. There's a solution out of it, but there's something up. I'm confident that there's something up. So how can we figure out what the root of the problem is, solve it for 2017 so you don't find yourself in this hole in years to come? And if you solve it, then you'll have a lot more free cash flow, which will let you dig yourself out of this $35,000 in debt. It's going to take some work, but it's worth doing. It'll change the way you feel about your business. Good luck.